Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and we know we haven't done a video for quite some time now. Main reason for that is we're pretty much back to business as usual. In other words, when we first started the channel, obviously we were in lockdown 1 and we promised you one video every single day, and then obviously after the other lockdowns as well, we also promised you one video a day. And obviously if you have a wander through our YouTube channel, you will notice in there we've got, I don't know, getting on to about 300 videos in total, so there's a fair few. But obviously as we slowly, and I mean slowly and cautiously, move out of COVID altogether, in a way we're back to doing our normal jobs. We're back in schools, we're back in museums, back doing living history and all sorts of things really. So we have actually got less time, but as we said, we will try and do them every now and again. And unfortunately there's been several months where we haven't done a video. So first of all, happy new year, and obviously straight on to today's video. Now, as it is February, as we are still in the sort of winter springtime period, and as we all know that over the next few days we may even see some snow flurries, we thought we'll actually be quite topical and we'll talk about the River Severn and what actually happened in the winter time. But we're also going to look at London and in particular the Thames as well. So we're going to look at the interesting topic of frost fairs, and I don't know if anyone's ever heard of a frost fair. Frost fairs were very clever things because obviously on the land there was many charters, and the charters, even in London and in Worcester, were very strict on where you were allowed to sell goods. So you had to be a member of a guild, for example, to trade on the high street, to be a peddler, to own a shop or something like that. And obviously when rivers iced over, you were technically not trading on the land, you were actually trading on water. So there's a bit of a grey area there. So a frost fair was a big party, a chance for people to sell things, often without paying any taxes on it, because obviously the trade charters, as I said, were really concerning trading on the land. So frost fairs were quite good events really. Now we don't get frost fairs anymore. Main reason for that is our climate is much warmer. If you turn back the clock into the 17th and 18th century, it was actually much colder. We know that during the Civil War period, the English Civil War, we went through pretty much a mini ice age. And then if you turn back the clock during the Black Death, crops failed, really poor weather conditions. So in the past, it was much colder and allowed for rivers to freeze over. Now, the other interesting thing is we've tamed rivers over the years. If you look at London, the embankments, for example, really do control that river. And obviously, if you think of the Thames as well, you've got the flood barriers and so on. Now, this is a brilliant picture of Worcester, and it actually shows an untamed river. So as you can see, this is what is now North Quay down by the racecourse, and it hasn't got a promenade or anything like that. It is literally a mud bank, and you would have had a mud bank that side, and that was the norm years ago. It was an untamed river, which actually meant if a river was going to freeze, it's more likely to freeze when there isn't an embankment. In other words, it's much shallower on the edges, which obviously allows the ice crystals to form and the freeze to begin. The other interesting thing is when you've got an untamed river, rivers are generally slower at moving, especially if you look at the River Severn, and that also aids the formation of ice. And the other clever thing I always find when you're starting to look at why frost fairs took place is when you look at the bridges. Now this is a relatively modern bridge. This is the 18th century bridge, the John Gwynne Bridge in Worcester. We actually had a medieval bridge, and this 18th century illustration shows the demolition of that bridge. Now the old bridge, the old medieval bridge, was multiple arches, and the arches were much narrower. So when you think about an untamed river, a slower moving river, a shallower river even, and in particular the bridges with multiple arches, very narrow arches, This all aids up the freezing process, basically. So in Worcester, just like in London, rivers frosted up all the time, froze over all the time, and in many cases froze really, really thickly. However, as I said, modern times, rivers are tamed. We've got new bridges with less arches. We don't need multiple arches anymore. We've got better engineering, and then add to that, the climate is much warmer. So when you put all those things together, we will never, sadly, have another frost fair. Now, we've had frost fairs for many, many years. London famously used to host them on a regular basis in the winter time, and it was just a case of waiting for the next cold period. Now in 1608 we get reference to the first official frost fair in London on the Thames. So that is an illustration of it. It's quite a famous illustration of it, really. And as you can see, people's taken to the ice. It was thick enough to actually put tents and shacks up on the ice, as you can see either side here. That's the River Thames flowing through there, or shall we say frozen through the middle of London. And there's the one embankment there, the other embankment just of here. What they've actually done is gone from the steps of the one side to the steps of the other side, creating a separate avenue on the ice. And if you have a close look, you will actually see they are shacks, they are sheds, they're all sorts of things really. And as I said, because charters really regulated trade on the land, many people got away with certain trading on the ice really. And you see some brilliant descriptions of what went on with those. People sold all sorts of things, spiced apple, spiced cider, for example. And then you also get lots and lots of plays and lots of activities. We've got football going on there. We've got sledges being dragged by horses there. We've even got a sailboat being dragged on the ice with people in it, being dragged by people just there. There was a lot going on. There was also cockfighting, cock throwing as well, which was a very barbaric sport where you have a cock all tied to a staff and then you throw small lead bars at it really to kill it off. It's an horrific thing, but was big entertainment years ago. But 1608 is the first best recorded frost fair that London ever had. They probably had them previous to that as well, but really the 1608 one was the first official one. But then later on in 1683, in the winter of 1683-1684, there was actually a very big frost fair, and this one is also recorded in pictures as well. That is a picture of the Great Frost, and that's what it was known as. It was the biggest freeze that London had ever had, the biggest freeze Britain had for many, many years, and therefore it was nicknamed the Great Frost. And in this picture, you once again see the tents, the shacks, all the make-do different traders selling things. There's all sorts of things going on there. There's all the sports going on in the background. And this one, you can actually see London Bridge, and what is very striking is the fact there are buildings on London Bridge, and famously there was always buildings on that bridge for many, many years. And this was a big talking point. We know it was a big talking point purely because lots of pamphlets were created, like this one here called The Great Frost, and this one shows a detailed look at the activities going on the ice. There's even descriptions of people having a pig roast on the ice. So they've actually got braziers sat up on the ice with fire in it, obviously, and someone's turning a spit with, for example, a pig on it, and people are selling it, along with people selling horse chestnuts and that sort of thing. Very much a Christmas fair on the ice. It always amazes me that these things didn't go through the ice, and that's the problem with the frost fair. Some people say, how long do they last? They last as long as the ice is there. It could be a day or so, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever. Now, we have a description of the 1683-84 frost fair. There's quite a few, and I'll just read a small extract of it here. Coaches plied from Westminster to the Temple, and from several other stairs to and fro, as in the streets, sleds sliding and skates, a bull baiting, horses and coach races, puppet plays and interludes, cooks, tippling and other lewd places, so that it seems to be a Buchanan Triumph or Carnival on the Water, and that's by John Evelyn, who was a diarist at the time. But there are many descriptions going on to great details of all the entertainments that was going on, and they are taken really from that little pamphlet known as the Great Frost. There was also souvenirs made because it was such a great frost, a great freeze. Printers often carried their heavy printing presses and printed on the ice, and this here is actually a very important souvenir. It was printed on the ice, and as you can see from the top name, Charles II, King Charles II, the man that ran away from the Battle of Worcester, he actually went onto the ice with members of the royal family, as you can see here. And he had this produced by the printer. It says at the bottom, printed by G. Groom on the ice on the River Thames, January the 31st, 1684. So it was that spectacular. He actually had this souvenir made, and people would go down there, get their names put into the printing block, and then have this souvenir printed. But it wasn't the only thing, because some people had tankards made with the Great Frost on. Another favourite of mine has to be this silver spoon, and this silver spoon actually has engraved into it the Great Frost. But I find it absolutely fascinating that a lot of these things were actually produced on the ice itself, so printed actually on the ice as major momentums really of this Great Frost. But then by the 18th century things began to warm up a little, and even though there were frost fairs, there was less of them, and you see that especially if we're looking at the Thames in London, for example. So here we have the 1715-1716 frost fair, so not as serious as the Great Frost. And what is amazing by this, it's a woodcut, and it was a woodcut that was carved on the ice. So they actually took a block of wood, carved it, then inked it, and then printed the prints of it. So this had the whole process from start to finish completed on the ice. An amazing thing to do really. But once again, you see the shacks, the sheds, the tents set up on the ice. You also see all the entertainment. You see the bull baiting, the dog baiting, the cockfighting going on, and you'll also see just in the corner there, hopefully you'll see it on the camera, you have also got the roasting of a pig or a cow by the look of it, all done on the ice. Frost fairs, they're quite spectacular things. I would love to be able to go back and see a frost fair, but like I said, the conditions, the fact that we've tamed the rivers are deeper, they are much fast flowing now, and more importantly, the bridges have wider arches and less arches. We will never ever have a frost fair again. The climate on its own is just not cold enough for them. But then in 1739 there was also another frost fair down in London, and you can see the ice and the snow in this one. It's quite a nice, quite a spectacular picture of it, and once again you've got the tents, there's even flags on these tents. But famously, the last frost fair ever held in London on the Thames was actually a year before the Battle of Waterloo, and that obviously was 1814. And this is a picture of the last of the frost fairs from 1814. This one iconically has the St Paul's Cathedral in the background. What you have to remember is the earlier ones, pre-Great Fire of London, it's a little bit different. So this one is with the new St Paul's Cathedral in the middle. But once again, they take on a very similar feel. Lots of tents, lots of shacks, lots of entertainment, football, the bear baiting, the cockfighting, and so on. 1814, spectacularly, is also recorded as having an elephant walk across the ice from one side of the River Thames to the other. There was lots of people cashing in to make it famous for one reason or another. This is a close-up of the 1814 frost fair, and as you can see, you've even got all sorts of what we would now call fairground rides in it as well. So they were quite spectacular events, and like I said, sadly we will never see one again. 1814, they did actually have lots of souvenirs being produced, tankards again, things like spoons. But once again, strangely, a printing press was brought down to the River Thames, and this is a copy of one of the souvenirs that was produced, and it is quite interesting to read it because it says here, notice, whereas you, Jack Frost, have by force and violence taken possession of the River Thames, I hereby give you warning to quit immediately, and it's signed A. Thor, someone with a great sense of humour, 1814. But as I said, London wasn't the only place that had frost fairs. They seem to happen all over Britain, wherever there was a river. In the case of Worcester, we had them as well. They're not as well recorded as the ones in London on the Thames, but we know the last one in Worcester to be held was around about 1855. We know this because souvenirs were produced. This one is from 1855. Mr. Sefton was a printer down on Broad Street. It actually says that in his address at the bottom. He actually moved his printing press onto the ice and produced this. The name in the middle, by the way, is just the person that wanted it personalised, and then very simply they would take the name out, put in another name and print it for someone else, basically. But he actually states on his souvenir that a man called Mr. Grundy was the first man to take a printing press on the ice in 1795. So this goes to show that even though we've been mentioning the frost fairs down in London, the Thames, which are the more famous ones, everywhere seem to have them, including Worcester. Now, saying that, when the frost or the great freeze stopped and things warmed up again, obviously many a time the ice melted extremely fast, and there were several accidents and incidents that used to take place. In the 1855 one in Worcester, for example, a Reverend Walter Thursby, he actually jumped in to save a girl as the ice started to melt suddenly one day during that great frost fair. But it is interesting that we will never see them again, unfortunately. But when there is a thaw, there is also a lot of water. And famously at the moment, there is quite a bit of water in Worcester, which is one of the reasons why we decided to do this video on the Frost Fair, because obviously the River Severn in particular, or flooding, is in the news at the moment, and the fact that we've got a little bit of cold weather on its way, but not as cold as it would be to get a complete freeze of the river. Anyway, saying that, as we always say with these videos, hopefully that's given you a little taste or a little chance to hear a bit, because only a little bit of information about frost fairs, and hopefully you will think, maybe I'm going to have a look at frost fairs in a bit more detail, because as we always say, we like to use these videos as really a starter of a topic. Anyway, we'll try and be more regular with our videos in the future. Let us know what you would like to see and hear, and we'll put them on. So from all at Discover History, Happy New Year, as we said, and we promise that we'll do much more in the videos on YouTube in the future. See you soon. Bye bye.